everyone, and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be teaching you to mage. Well, I'm not going to teach you the whole concept of maging because it's quite a lengthy topic and there's no way I can cover all of it in one video today. So instead I'm going to be splitting it up to a couple of videos which I'll release at different points this week. Today it's just going to be an introduction to counting sync because counting sync is like the scariest part, and I feel like once you guys have mastered this, or at least once you become more comfortable and becomes less of a scary concept, I think it will motivate you to mage a lot more. So in under 10 minutes, or in just about 10 minutes, today hopefully I can teach all of you guys to learn to at least count sync and that sort of thing. First of all, we're going to actually introduce the concept of maging real quick to the people who are really beginners. Now, what is maging? Basically, whenever you craft any item, the item is going to have a natural boundary of stats within which but natural boundary, like natural brackets within which the stats can fall. Now, the stats that you'll get out of it are going to be random, but they'll always fall within a certain bracket. For example, this here I have a Cloak of 1,000 Excuses. Now, the effects here you can see Vitality 301 to 350, Strength 71 to 100, crits 4 to 6%, right? Now, you can see the rest here, of course. So anytime I craft an item, I'm going to get any stats that fall within this. But unfortunately, more often than not, you're going to get suboptimal stats, right? So if I craft this, then chances are I'll probably, on average get like 330 vitality, maybe like 85 strength, right? Just like taking midpoints, maybe 5 crits. But now, okay, 330 vitality is cool and 85 strength is cool, but I want these maximum stats. Like I want to really profit from what this cloak has to offer. So you can do that, and in order to do that, you have to mage. So what is maging? Maging is basically using runes and fusing them with an item in order to increase its stats towards the maximum edge of the boundary and beyond. So there are ways to go beyond, and there are ways to do really cool things with maging, such as adding stats that did not even belong on the item in the first place. For example, here I have a corrupted bow. So a corrupted bow naturally does not have any fire percent resistance, but this man, Ben Pharaoh, took it upon himself to to put on some fire resistance onto the thing, and he managed to do it, right? So he probably dropped off the range, which helped him accumulate a lot of sync, which he put into the item in order to get that 3% out of it. Now, what does it mean, dropping the range and getting the sync, all these terms? I'll explain to you in a moment. But I just want to show you. So you can do cool things like add on stats that did not previously belong on the item. That's called exotic maging. You can also do over maging. For example, here, this Scappu helmet that I have naturally only goes up to 350 vitality, but mine goes up to 445. Now, that's called over maging. I maged it myself, and I just wanted more vitality out of it, so I got myself more vitality out of it. Now, these are all really cool things you can do with maging, and they really change the game. Like, for example, right now, with my 2 characters, I'm doing all the duos in the game, starting from really low level ones, right? And my characters are low level. Now, there's no way I would be winning these dungeons if it wasn't for maging my gear with over vitalities and stuff, so I can actually last in these fights. So counting sync is very important, maging is very important, and all these things will really help you in the game. So let's just get right into it. How do you count sync? Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is familiarize yourself with this, and with this. Now, these two things are just the same thing demonstrated in different ways. I will link this screenshot in the description. I will link this link in the description, but it's just the Dofus wiki, right? So what this is basically just telling you is the sync value for every stat. Now, that may be a confusing concept. It might be a little bit scary and daunting to look at such a big list and be like, oh my god, what the hell is this? Really, it truly is not. It's a lot more simple than you might think. Let me explain to you here. So, on the left side, we just have the stat, right? So here you have AP, here you have MP, here you have range, and over here, this is the main one you're going to be wanting to look at. So stat, and then here you have sync value. So an AP has a sync value of 100. A MP has a sync value of 90. Now, I've been trying to think and come up with a really good way to explain this to you via like some analogy. The best thing I was able to come up with is, imagine you have a bucket, right? So you have a bucket of a certain size, and that bucket within it has like a bunch of different size rocks, right? So it has a bunch of different size rocks filling up the bucket. Now the different sizes correspond to the different tsink value. Think of the tsink as weight or as size, right? So an AP has a tsink value of 100. It's the biggest size rock in the bucket, right? It's the biggest size rock possible. An MP is very close at 90, a little bit behind, a little bit smaller, but it's still very, very big. Now you got range, which is 51, you got summon, which is 30. These are all things that have pretty large sizes. Near the bottom, you have things that have a lot of smaller sizes, like 2, 1, 1, that sort of thing. Now these are all mixed within this big bucket. And as you mage, you're going to be like removing certain things, you're going to be putting certain things, and as you do this, you're going to be making space, you're going to be removing space. And the thing that's interesting is that when you make space, which is what you're hoping for, you want to make space in order to fix up the stats. So the typical way in which you would make space, I'll show you later, is by removing one of these, okay, which will free up the space. But then you want to magically put it back in where it's in there, but it doesn't take up any space. So I'll show you a little bit what I mean in a second. Just bear with me here. But like if I remove this and I create 100 space, right, and then I put it back in without removing any space, somehow magically, right, I shrink it with a Rikiki wand or something. Imagine. So now that stat is still in the bucket, but there's still 100 space left, and now I can start to fill up that space with other runes. And the cool thing is when you have empty space and you're putting on other stats, there's no risk of any other stat droppage, right? So let's say I'm over here maging, right? I have this cloak of 1,000 excuses that I had just showed you. I'm not gonna go too in depth with what I'm doing or anything. Let's just say I put this here. Typically when I put a rune, it's going to drop off other stats. But if I've created empty space that I can now use, then I can use that empty space and I can put in stats without any risk of any of these things dropping. I can put on stats and nothing will drop. Now, when I mage, usually you can see here things drop, but once more, if I have that empty space, that magic space that I created, that like magical space in that bucket, then I can start filling it in and with no risk of things dropping. And that's the ideal. That's what we're going for here. And that's why it's important to count tsink. Now, how do you count? How do you count? 1, 2, 3. How do you count tsink, right? So you look at this chart here. This chart and this over here, the tsink value, is telling you the tsink value per stat. So one stat of strength is worth 1 tsink. One stat of intelligence is worth 1 tsink. Chance, agility, pushback resistance, critical resistance, these are 2. These resistances here are 2. Power is 2. Wisdom is 3. You can see it all here. This is per 1 tsink. No, this is per 1 stat, right? So 3 tsink per 1 stat for wisdom. Now, if you take a wisdom rune with plus 1 wisdom, then that means that that rune has a weight or a size of 3. It has a size of 3, but for example, if you take the Pa version, if you look over here, so that one has a size of 3, right? If you take the Pa version, a Pa wisdom rune has 3 wisdom. So 3 times 3, because each one is worth 3, and there's 3 in there, right? So then it's going to have a total of 9. So that's how you count it, right? Now I'll give you another example. Take Vitality runes. Vitality runes have 0.2 per stat, but a Vitality rune, a regular one, has 5 stats in it. So a regular Vitality rune has plus 5. So plus 5, right, times 0.2 is just equal to 1, because each one is worth 0.2, and there's 5. So we do 5 times 0.2, we get 1. Now, Pa Vitality has 15. 15 times 0.2 is 3. A Raw Vitality has 50. 50 times 0.2 is 10. So you have this chart to help you. If you want to look at the individual tsinks, you can always refer back to this, which is the Dofus wiki. Again, they'll both be in the description. And that's basically what these tsink values are. Now, how do you count them? I got some examples ready for you over here. Let's remove this. And let's go through these. So whenever you put on any rune, you're going to have one of 4 possible outcomes. Well, really 5, but the 5th one doesn't really matter. It's basically just a non-result. Like sometimes you put on a rune and it's just going to say failure. By the way, I'm realizing now we're going to go over 10 minutes. That's fine. Hopefully we won't keep it too long, maybe like 12 minutes or something. I hope you guys will forgive me. So anyways, whenever you put on a rune, you're going to have one of 4 possible outcomes. So the first one is going to be a critical success. So a critical success is when you put on a rune and it just lands perfectly and does not drop any other stats or change the tsink. So after this line, there's no minus tsink, there's no plus tsink. There's nothing and no other stats have dropped. That is called a critical success. There's nothing to count here. There's no tsink because there's no tsink change. Over here we have a critical failure. This is the complete reverse. You have a critical success, which is when it lands and nothing changes. Here you have a critical failure where it doesn't land, right? Something drops and there's no tsink change. So what's going to drop and no tsink change? It's going to have to be something of equal tsink value to what you put on. So these two are actually of equal tsink value. So, but let's take it for this example, right? I dropped 10 strength. 10 strength, how much tsink is that? So each 1 strength is worth 1. So 10 strength is just going to be worth 10, right? Or you can refer back to here. Each 1 strength is worth 1. That means that a raw strength, which is 10, is just going to be worth 10 tsink. So I must have dropped it with something that is worth 10. What here is worth 10? For example, a crit. A critical hit rune, that is worth 10 tsink. So I might have dropped it with a critical hit rune. So if I put on a critical hit rune and I get the following result, then I just dropped 10 strength, my critical hit rune did not land, and there was no tsink change. That is called a critical failure. There's nothing to count here. Now, here's what we have that is called a success. So success, that is not a critical success, is where the rune lands, but it drops something in the process and it changes the tsink of the item. Or it can also just minus the tsink of the item if you already had spare tsink. Now tsink, remember guys, is just basically the space that you have available. So for this, we're going to actually bust out the calculator. And let's start doing some quick maths over here. So what you want to think about is the space that you're freeing up. So 1% critical rune here, I just put on, what I put on is a critical resistance. Now a critical resistance, if we look over here, is worth 2 tsink. And a critical hit is worth 10. But so what does that mean? What did I do? I put into the bucket a rock, which is the critical resistance rock, which is worth 2 size, 2 tsink, whatever value you want to give it, right? It has a tsink of 2. That's what we call it. So how much space did I take away from the bucket? I took away 2. So I did minus 2 to the bucket. I took away 2 space. Now how much space did I free up? Well, I dropped this over here, which is a 1% critical, and that's worth 10. So I freed up 10 space. So I can do plus 10. So how much free space do I have on my item now? I have 8. So with 8 tsink, or 8 free space, I can now freely fill in those 8 free spaces without worry of anything dropping. And 8 tsink is, for example, I could do 4 critical resistance runes, right? Because each one's worth 2. 2 times 4 is 8. I can put 4 critical resistance runes without any worry about any other stats dropping. That's what it means for me to have some free space. And over here, you have a failure. So a failure is where you put on a rune, it does not land. Okay, here's where it lands, here's where it does not land, and it drops some things and it changes the tsink, right? So if it had dropped some things without changing the tsink, which means it dropped things that have an equal weight to what it is, right? For example, back here, we put on like a critical percentage rune and it dropped 10, so it's minus 10 plus 10, right? Same thing, plus 10 minus 10 equals 0. There's no net result. Here's where there is a net result. So for things like this, it's important to remember what rune you use. So I remember that for this particular example, I used a neutral damage rune. So if we refer to the chart, any elemental damage has a tsink of 5. So a tsink of 5 means that if I put it on here, it's going to drop things of up to 5 tsink or more, right? Here I happen to get more, which means that I got some free space. How much free space? Well, let's check it out. Over here, how much free space did I get? I removed 1 strength rune, right? 1 strength rune came out, so that freed up the space of that 1 strength rune. And if we refer to the chart once more, 1 strength rune is equal to 1. So we do plus 1, that's how much space I have. And how much space do I have in terms of how much space did this give me? Well, I dropped 1% water resistance rune, which is worth tsink, which is worth 6 tsink. You're going to have to take my word for it. It's worth 6 tsink. So I freed up 6 space. But all this I tried to do with a neutral damage rune. And I cannot neglect the rune that I tried to put in, even if it did not land. Even if it did not land, I have to count it. So I tried to drop these with a neutral damage rune. A neutral damage rune is worth 5 tsink. So I'm going to do minus 5 because I tried to put in a rune that has a tsink or a size of 5. and I am left with 2. So now in this example, I'm left with plus 2 tsink. I hope you guys understood that. I hope that was clear enough. And here we have a final one, which is going to be practice. I left this one here because I think it's interesting to actually show you guys what happened. This one we can talk about a little bit more. Also, this video is way more than... Sorry, my alarm just went off there. Yeah, so the video is a little bit more than 10 minutes, forgive me. But I really want to explain the concept of tsink. So next video, when I explain how to overmage and exomage and that sort of thing, it's clear to you guys and there's no confusion. So what happened here? This one's a particular case, so I wanted to show you guys so that you fully understand what's going on and you can actually follow with me hopefully next episode. So if we just do our regular calculations, right? Ignore this negative tsink part at the end. So what happened here? We put on 1 neutral damage rune, right? We put on 1 neutral damage rune, we put it into the bucket, so we removed 5 space because each one's worth 5. So now we're at -5. But we removed 6 vitality points. So how much space does 6 vitality points have? Well, if we go back to the initial chart, each vitality has a space of 0.2. So 0.2 times 6 is equal to 1.2, right? Sorry, did I do that right? 0.2? No, 0.2 times 6 has 1.2, right? So we got 1.2 minus the 5 that we tried to put in. We're now at -3.8, so unfortunately you cannot actually be at negative tsink, so that doesn't make sense. What's going on here? Well, this just meant that I had some tsink previously that I had not counted for, right? Or maybe I had counted for, but that's just the result. You can never be at negative tsink, so what must have happened here is I must have had some tsink from before, and here it's just balancing out. So let's say before I had like 3.8 tsink left, right? Let's imagine. So let's say before I had 3.8 tsink left. So I started with 3.8, right? I gained my 1.2 from that vitality, and then I removed the rest with 5, and now I'm at 0, and now it's balanced out. So the game will often do that. Typically when you're maging, you'll like lose random stats like that, and you'll see like minus tsink, and you'll be like, wait, that's not possible. That will put me at negative. Well, you have to account for what was before it. So like it all accumulates and moves throughout. Anyways, I hope that was a clear enough explanation of how to count tsink. I'll go over it some more next episode, or yeah, next video where I'm explaining maging, and we'll hopefully get into some like exomaging, that sort of thing. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to some of you, and I hope you guys have a good day. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.